Hi class, Dr. Colson. I'm here for our last week live meeting. I didn't receive any questions and I don't have any attendees right now, so I'm just going to kind of go over last week's PowerPoint or discussion board to kind of go over those legally correct answers and things like that. So I'm going to start with Chapter 8. And hang on just a second here and I'll get this on here for you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you. All right, so question 1 wants to know, during the annual case review, better known as ACR, conference for a disabled visually impaired child, the parent requested extended school year ESY services. The parent felt that since both parents work, the child's vision and social growth would deteriorate because of limited visual stimulations, such as provided in school, and social growth because of the lack of peer contact. The school indicated that the only criteria necessary to consider for ESY services was the regression recruitment analysis, and examining that factor, the school felt the child would not be required to provide ESY services. Technically, the public school is correct because we're really looking at the regression recruitment, but it is strongly urged for schools to look further, especially at the parents' ability to continue or provide services during the summer. Most all students do have some type of regression that occurs during the summer. That's why we spend the first couple of weeks of school kind of reviewing. But there needs to be, in situations like this, we really should look at other factors as well. Okay, and question number 2, this one is talking about parent is requesting due process because of the method that a school district is going to use with their autistic child. In this case, the public school is correct. Because schools do have a right to just determine the curriculum that will be used. It is a highly best practice that these are research-based, peer-reviewed techniques. That's why in most of your classes you're looking for research-based instructional strategies and things like that that will help hold up in court if it is ever deemed not appropriate for a student or is not backed by research. All right, and question number 3, this one is talking about fees. So students are receiving fees, but then there's a special fee for an adaptive writing utensil that is tagged onto a student with disability. And the parent said that these should be provided free since they were specifically designed for the need of their child. And the school disagrees that all parents have to provide pencils, so this fee was appropriate. In this case, the parent is correct because providing an adaptive writing utensil would be a related services, and the school should provide those free of charge. Same thing if you had a calculator or a special textbook, anything along those lines, these are related services. All right, that concludes Chapter 8. And we'll look at Chapter 9 here and kind of go over those with you really quick. Chapter 9, this talks about, we're talking about child find. In question 1, it says that the LEA is told that because of child find requirements, children in local private schools have the right to be evaluated when a disability is suspected. The LEA, however, does not agree that it has an obligation to evaluate students suspected of a disability in religious schools. Parents of children enrolled in a parochial school disagree that the decision and file a state complaint expressing that the LEA is incorrect in its interpretation of IDEA. In this case, the parent is correct. All children are who have a suspected disability, regardless if they're attending public school or private school. The LEA has an obligation to locate and suggest, if not, evaluate those students for services. So regardless if they're in parochial school or not, it is the LEA's responsibility to evaluate those students, or let parents know they have a right to be evaluated based on the disability. All right, in question 2, it talks about an IEE, which is an independent education evaluation. A lot of times these are done when parents disagree with what the school's evaluation is. A lot of times schools, parents will request that they have an IEE done, and they'll have this done and they'll take the results to the school. And in this case, this is what the parents do. They have this happen, and the parents indicate that the school must consider the IEE at the case conference. And actually, this is correct. Schools must consider it, but they do not have to follow it. So they cannot just ignore it and say, no, we're not going to look at that. Things like that. They have to actually consider it and take into account what another evaluation agency found. All right, in this question, it says the local school district has a policy that under certain circumstances does not require an automatic 3-year reevaluation of all disabled students. A group of parents of disabled children filed a state complaint indicating that the local district is not compliant with IDEA by not requiring reevaluations every 3 years automatically for all special education students. IDEA does require a reevaluation every 3 years. Parents and schools can mutually agree that there is no reevaluation needed, that the disability still continues, and then they can submit that information. But that is still part of the reevaluation process, is going through that. So yes, the parent is correct in this, that they have to require and reevaluation is required. Okay, in this one, a bilingual student at Webster Middle School who speaks both English and Spanish fluently is evaluated for special education with assessment instrument in English. The parents become angry and file a state complaint because the tests administered were not in Spanish, which is the language the parents use at home. The school informs the parents that English is the language the student speaks at school, and that English assessments will provide the school with the most accurate information. Who is legally correct? Well, in this case, the parent is legally correct. All assessments must be performed in the student's native language. So therefore, they should have been given to the child in Spanish. Even though the child is bilingual, the native language of that child is Spanish. All right, so that kind of takes care of chapter 9. So let's kind of hit chapter 10 here. Okay, in this one, it wants to know, it says the case conference was called for a new student that had been recently evaluated. At the conference, there was no general education teacher present because the school did not feel that the committee recommendations would include inclusion with the regular classroom. During the case conference, however, the committee recommended placement for the period in one regular classroom. The parents requested that a general education teacher be asked to come to the conference. The principal denied the request because the teacher was teaching class during that conference. It was legally correct. As you can tell, the parents are legally correct in this. If a child is going to be placed into a general education classroom, then a general education classroom teacher must be present during the case conference hearing, especially if this is a new placement. The parents will probably definitely have questions for that gen ed teacher. So in this case, it is the parent. Okay, in this one, a student was recently evaluated and recommended for special education services. Prior to the case conference to discuss the evaluation and eligibility, the principal informed the parents that the psychologist who did the evaluation would not be able to attend. However, the principal told the parents that the school counselor could discuss the results because she had training that would allow her to interpret the instructional implications of the results. The parent filed a state complaint indicating the LEA was not legally meeting the requirement for IEP participation. Who was legally correct and why? In this case, the public school is legally correct. The counselor can provide, as long as whoever's providing is the interpreter of the results, has had training and can thoroughly explain, then they are meeting the requirements. So that would definitely be the public school. The LEA has made numerous efforts to involve the parents in a case conference to determine special education eligibility and program. The parent has made no attempt to cooperate with the school. The school therefore went ahead and held the case conference without the parent in attendance. Recommendations were made and the IEP was submitted to the parents for consent to placement. The parents said they would not consent and would file a state complaint because the school illegally had held the case conference without their required participation. Who is legally correct and why? For initial eligibility, you have to have parental consent. So in this one, the school should have filed due process against the parent for not consenting. Usually after initial placement, you can hold case conference without parental consent and can send home prior written notice for that. But with this being the initial eligibility, and this is kind of a tricky one too. But like I said, you have to have parental consent to test a child for special education. All right, so in this case, during case conference for a 15-year-old disabled student, the parent requests that the school include the student's IEP, the transition services, in that student's IEP, the transition services necessary for that student. The school does not agree and tells the parent that transition services will be in effect when the child turns 16, as the rules require. Who is legally correct? Well, in this case, technically the public school, because transition is not required until the child turns 16. But if that child turns 16 during that IEP year, then they would be required. So this is kind of a tricky one. And then it also depends on state law. Here in Indiana, if you are 14, then if we were talking about in Indiana, the parents would be correct for sure, because you must have a transition service plan in place by the age of 14. All right, so that kind of hits that. Just to kind of recap what we're doing this week. You have the least restrictive environment, procedural safeguards, and disciplining students with disabilities. And then you have your state law report. Make sure you send me any questions. Everything is due by Sunday, so please make sure you have that. I have to turn grades in on Monday, so I cannot accept any late work at all. So make sure you have that turned in. All right, well, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks. I've had a great semester with you guys. Bye.